don't know anyone who doesn't want a little hope. And experts across disciplines, medicine, sociology, theology, they all seem to recognize that actually people cannot live without hope. It's a need, not a want, a necessity, not a nice to have. But hope is a hard thing to capture. Even the language we use to try to describe it reveals this truth. Hope, as Emily Dickinson once wrote, is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. I used to read those words and think that hope was a certain lightness, but they also convey something else about the nature of hope, which is its ephemerality, its elusiveness. It's hard to contain, hard to predict, and sometimes, can we be honest with ourselves this morning and with each other? Sometimes it is hard to feel. And that's when coffee mug theology comes up short, I think. I've learned in almost 13 years of ministry that prescribing a feeling or an outlook for somebody else, particularly somebody who is struggling with present circumstances, mostly has the opposite of the intended effect. And clipped from its context, Jeremiah 29:11 risks becoming unhelpful, even dismissive pastoral care by suggesting to the people that if they don't feel particularly hopeful, then they haven't been particularly faithful, or that their trust in God is somehow deficient. Said differently, because our wider culture tends to elide optimism and hope, we might just conclude from this verse lifted from its context that being glass half full people is what God requires of us. Hope floats after all. Hope springs eternal, we say. But in Jeremiah 29, the people of Judah need something a little sturdier than bland optimism on the one hand and sighing resignation on the other. King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon has laid siege to Jerusalem, and the Babylonians have forced the people to leave everything they know and everything that makes them recognizable to themselves behind. And status, it hasn't protected anyone either. This passage is addressed to the elite, to leaders, to people in power and with means, people who were respected or who at least had plenty of agency, who have been conscripted to labor for a foreign king. And their captors have left the Jerusalem temple, the site considered the place where God had made God's home with the people, the place where God was present with the people in piles of rubble. And Jeremiah is not the only prophet that addresses the people. There are lots of other prophets, false prophets, people like Hananiah, peddling a false optimism, telling people not to worry because this is just a temporary thing. This exile, it would be short and would be over before they knew it, maybe 2 years max, and it would all be a distant memory. False prophets always overpromise and underdeliver. During the height of the pandemic, Arthur C. Brooks opened an article about the difference between hope and optimism by telling the story of James Stockdale, a U.S. Navy vice admiral who was held for more than 7 years in a North Vietnamese prison. During that time, Stockdale noticed a surprising trend among his fellow inmates. Some of them survived the appalling conditions, others did not. The surprise was that those who didn't tended to be the most optimistic of the group. Stockdale said they were the ones who said, we're going to be out by Christmas. And Christmas would come and go. And Easter would come and go. And then Thanksgiving. And then it was Christmas again. And they died of a broken heart. Brooks goes on to say that there's nothing wrong with optimism, and I agree that for about 34% of people, actually, the outlook seems to be genetic. What he argues against is a little subtler than that. He argues against a hopeless optimism. Isn't that interesting? a hopeless optimism that downplays the challenges of the present moment, vacates them even, as it anticipates a better future. But what the people need, what people in difficult historical moments need, is a way to live in the present without sinking into despair or dying of a heart broken by false promises or naivete. What the people need, in short, according to Jeremiah, is hope. Hope is a way of life. It looks to the future, placing its trust in the faithfulness of God and the belief that history is moving in the direction of the day when God will put all things to rights. When, to borrow words from Julian of Norwich, all shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. And hope recommits to living in a certain way in the meantime. Hopeful people are people of action. They don't downplay present challenges, nor do they overestimate them. And in that way, people of hope embody a certain realism shaped by their faith. They show up to the present moment and cultivate life according to the gifts that God has given them. Hopeful people do not passively wait for a better day. They are in the meantime people who trust that God is present with them, even in stretches of life where all the usual signs of that presence are in rubble. And in that way, Jeremiah is the prophet of hope. He doesn't just tell the people what they want to hear, as tempting as that is. He delivers an undesired message about exile, one that would never make it onto a coffee mug, which is that it's going to last a lot longer than the people want it to, that some of them will die before it is over, and he urges a certain in the meantime living. Build houses and live in them, settle down. Plant gardens and eat what they produce, marry and increase in numbers, seek the welfare that is the shalom, that is a pervasive peace in the place where you find yourself. And yes, that means the welfare of your enemies too, because God's future is coming. So in the meantime, cultivate life and seek peace. I wonder if you've heard this story. It is set in 1913. A young man is traveling alone on a hiking trip through Provence in the south of France and into the Alps. And he's enjoying the beauty of the unspoiled wilderness there until one day he runs out of water in a treeless, desolate valley where only wild lavender can grow. And there are no signs of civilization there except for old, crumbling buildings. And all he can find is a well that has long since dried up. And it is there that a middle-aged shepherd finds him and takes him to a spring that he knows of. The young man is intrigued by the shepherd, and so he stays with him for a while, following him around that ruined landscape as the shepherd digs hole after hole and places an acorn in each one. Day after day, the shepherd plants acorn after acorn after acorn. The time comes for the young man to depart so that he may fight in the First World War. And many years later, he returns, shell-shocked and depressed, to that valley where he is taken aback by the life that is flourishing there. The formerly desolate land is full of saplings taking root in the valley, and new streams are running through it. The climate there completely changed by the one man who planted acorns. And it is there, in the context of all of that unlikely life, that the young soldier heals. Hopeful people believe in the promise of unlikely life. They commit to act, acorn by acorn, planting hope for a future that is sure to come, that may not seem possible given the present landscape, trusting the life that will come of it, even though they themselves may not see the fullness of its branches unfurling, even though they know it comes on God's timeline and not theirs. This week, I confessed to my best friend Taylor, who also happens to be my favorite preacher, that I'm not feeling all that hopeful these days. That the incessant news of political violence and political infighting and leadership uncertainty breeds in me feelings of anxiety and disappointment and unease and a temptation toward resignation. Can I say that out loud? She pointed out in her own way that I was thinking like Dickson about hope, that it's like a wild bird that comes to roost with us if we're lucky, but that might be easily scared away by the noise of weeks like this most recent one. And she offered me this poem by Rosemary Watola Traumer as a counterword, and now I offer it to you. It helped me. The poet writes this: hope has holes in its pockets. It leaves little crumb trails so that we, when anxious, can follow it. Hope's secret: it doesn't know the destination. It only knows that all roads begin with one foot in front of the other. It seems to me that there is always a temptation to passivity during difficult times. On the one hand, hopelessness says there's nothing to be done, while on the other, optimism says it's all going to work out, so there's nothing to do in the meantime, but hold on to that. But I think there is something to be done. There's always something to be done. And I think Jeremiah has a word for us today, too. I think he's calling to us across the distance of centuries to be a people of hope. And he's reminding us that there's a certain realism about hope. It acknowledges the situation and chooses to act, chooses to stay present, chooses to dignify the meantime by planting seeds now that will make for the flourishing of God's people, trusting that God will bring it to pass. Chaplain and activist William Sloane Coffin put it this way: hope is a state of mind independent of the state of the world. If your heart's full of hope, you can be persistent when you can't be optimistic. You can keep the faith despite the evidence, knowing that only in so doing has the evidence any chance of changing. So while I'm not always optimistic, I'm always very hopeful. My friends, we do not know what this week or any week will bring with it. And there's plenty of cause for discouragement, but our call, and it is a call, is to hope. And hope is not just a feeling, thanks be to God. It is a certain way of living. And we can all participate in it right now. We don't have to wait for the world to be better. We can build homes as a sign of our faith. We can plant the acorns of God's promises all over this city, trusting that acts of hope like that have the power to transform desolate valleys into fertile grounds where living streams of God's mercy can flow and healing can take place. We can let our joy in living now be a defiant witness to the God who is with us now and who always has been, and who certainly will be, come what may. And we can let our pockets have holes on purpose, so that the hope we have as we put one foot in front of the other can be shared freely with every child of God who needs it too. And I don't know anyone who doesn't need a little hope. Do you? To God be the glory, now and forever. Amen.